So the moment of truth, we've now got tubes in it. Let's go ahead and turn the variac on. Got the amp on standby. I'm going to flip it on. We've got the lead connected to the negative bias. We'll go ahead and set this to as cold as it'll go for right now. Make sure all the filaments are lit for the tubes. Or sorry, it was on. It's on standby now. Gosh, I keep doing that because I don't really have any experience with Fender amps with standby switches. And on the Fender, it says standby where it's actually off standby. So let me flip it back off standby. So now I hear output from the speaker. Let's go ahead and check some voltages real quick. So we want to go ahead and check on the 6L6s, the pins 3, which we did already, but just to confirm, this is going to the output transformer. It should be high voltage, and it is 431. Let me write that down. $431. And then let's do pin 4 right next to it. $430 as well. That one's hard to grab with the lead. Pin 4, it's 430. As well. And then we'll do, this is our negative bias, which is what we set it to before. And then pin 8 obviously is 0. Pin 7 and 2 are the heaters. So that's good. Now let's move on to the next one. This should be our bias, which it is. And then pin, what is this? Pin 4. Should be high voltage, which it is, 430. That's pin 4. And then we'll do pin 3, which is from the output transformer. That's also 430. Which is good. So that seems to check out okay. All right, so now we're going to move on to the phase inverter. 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7. So pin 1 on the phase inverter. It's 183.7. Pin 2 made quite a loud noise there. Pin 2 reads 55, about 56 volts. Honestly, I feel better not using this little guy. It's just so hard to reach those little ones, and I think I'd be better with the actual test lead. So I'm going to switch to that. Because I'm trying to hook it onto it, and there's too much solder on some of the pins. You can't actually get the hook around it, and it just becomes a bit more finicky. I think I can be more steady with this. Okay, so what did I do? That was pin 2, so now we'll do pin 3, which is pin 3 and pin 8 are together. So that's reading 90 volts. Then we'll go ahead and move on to 6 and 7. So this is 6. 175. And then we'll do 7 now. $60 on 7. Now I want to plug a guitar cable into it and see if we get any sound. I'll put it in standby. We'll go into the normal channel first. See if we get anything. Put all the pots on about 5. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but that is working. Yes! Heck yeah. All right, let's go and put the volume back to 0. Switch over to the vibrato channel. All these on about 5. These are obviously reverb tremolo. Those are off. Bingo. It works. Oh, yes. So excited. Awesome. I am not going to lie. I was sweating after turning it on and not working, and the intermittent light issue. Holy hell. That is such a relief. Okay, so I guess the next stage would be for us to bias the power tubes. Now let's see if any of these tubes, even though these aren't the tubes that are going to be in it. It's probably a dirty tube socket on the V1. Ooh, V2 is very dirty. Wow. Just moving that socket is causing a lot of noise. There's a big glob of solder there. That was not from me. I didn't add solder to these. I just heated them up. So I'm probably going to clean up that and clean out this tube socket. Let's see about V3. No, V3 seems fine. V4 also seems fine. V6, or V5, excuse me, fine. V6, fine. So V2 definitely needs to be cleaned. Make a note of this. V2, clean and resolder. V1, clean. Power tubes. Rectifier tube. Those sockets feel pretty tight. And then the last piece. So there's a few things that I guess I might as well call out now, just so you guys are aware that I'm already aware of it. One of these resistors, I believe it's this one right here by this blue multi cap. This should be a, let's see, what is it? A 22K, and is actually, I believe, a 27 or 28K. I didn't have any 22Ks, so I put it in there, but that will be replaced with a 22K, but it's going to take a minute for that to come in, so I'm not going to hold the entire video just for that. Then there's another resistor that is over, it's in the reverb circuit. It's this resistor right here, I believe. That is a, should be a 470K, but it's actually a 520 or 80K. And again, there's no place that sold a 470K New Old Stock AV resistor that I could find, but a kind gentleman is sending me one of those. So that's on the way as well. What else? I think those are the main pieces that are still missing. The bass pot had a resistor that was from, or that was a replacement from the previous tech/owner, and I put in an original one from the 67 Pro Reverb in that spot, so that would have been the same resistor. So that's good. I think that's about it. So now the parts to order still. Sorry guys, I'm rambling a little bit here. The parts that still need to be ordered. So I'm going to be getting a new switch here just to make sure that that's not a non-issue, since I want this to be reliable and to be able to eventually gig with this amp. So a new switch will be coming, and then I'll also order a new bias cap just to be safe, because I had positive voltage running on the negative side. So just to be safe, I'm going to replace that F&T. It's fine. And I think that's about it. Maybe I'll think of something else. But awesome. I can go to bed happy now and feel much, much better. So it's only 11 p.m. too. This is early. This is great. So now that we've checked all of the voltages in the amp at 117 volts and documented everything here on this schematic sheet, I'm feeling pretty good. Everything looks to be kind of exactly as you would expect at 117 volts on the Variac. So from here, I want to go ahead and start playing with the bias a little bit. So as you can see, I've got tubes in it. We'll be using the groove tubes that came with it when I bought it. These I just consider as donor testing tubes. There's a good chance they might have been, permanently damaged from the bias issue we had from the last episode of this series. But we'll see. We're going to start here and then kind of go from there. So what I do have to check bias, there's a few different ways to check bias, and this is one thing that's been fairly hush-hush, at least on YouTube. Not many people actually show them checking the bias. So there are methods where you can use an item like this. This is from Eurotubes, and it is a bias probe. Now, there's a few different companies that make them. This is the one that was recommended to me. I purchased it a while ago. These are not cheap, well over $100 if I remember correctly. There's other ways where you can put resistors off of certain pins on the ground into the chassis on the power tube sockets. That's one way, but that would, I don't know. I might eventually do that, but we're going to start with this. But I prefer doing something like this versus installing, resistors that wouldn't have been in it originally for that purpose. Now, obviously, I'm not an amp tech. This is my own personal amp, and I just want to do it this way. So, to each their own. So we're going to start and try with this. Now, you do need to have a calculator on hand, or there is a website that is extremely helpful with checking the bias. It's got a little kind of nice little calculator on it that you can check a bias with, and I will put the link to that in the description if you guys are curious about what I'm using. I think it's Robinette, something like that. Anyways, I will pull it up during this process, and I will use that as a calculator to determine what the bias range I'm able to get with the existing pot and resistor. So to do this, basically we just got to install this in place of one of the tubes. Now obviously there's two tube sockets, so we will be testing one tube and then switching over to the other tube, and then I'll probably switch the tubes to be in the different sockets as well to see if that makes a noticeable difference or not. So let's go ahead and install this first and foremost. I've only used this once before, so this will be kind of a learning experience with me as well. So we're at, it says 118 volts right now. So we will go ahead and see what that looks like. We'll let it warm up and stand by for a couple minutes. All right, so here is the website. I'm not sure if you can be able to see this. Robinette.com. If you just search tube bias calculator, it should be the first result that shows up. And basically it's got this little handy setup here where you select the tube type. In this case, I'm selecting 5881 WXT, These groove tubes are 6L6B. Yeah, GT6L6B is what they're designated as. And when I looked it up to see what those are, it came back as it's just a rebranded Sovtech 5881, as I understand it. So 26 watts is what it shows as the max. And then plate to cathode voltage is what we'll get here. And then we will input the data and see what it gives us. So let's go ahead and take it out of standby. So plate voltage saying 415. And then if you scroll down, you can go to plate current, and we'll put in 29 there. So plate dissipation is at 12 watts, which is 46.3% plate. Now, it seems to me like there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat with this as far as what plate dissipation you should shoot for. Some people say it should be 50%. Other people say it's 70%. It also depends on the type of bias setup in the amp, so whether it's cathode biased or not. So in this case, this is and also what class is it? So this is a class AB fixed bias, I believe is what you call it. So I was personally going to shoot for about 60% when I went into this. So we're looking at 46.3% right now, so we're pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and turn this for the bias and see what happens. You'll notice the numbers will change. So that was maxed out, by the way, one direction on the bias pot. So now we're going to go back here and pop in 424. And then down here, plate current, we'll put in 19. And now we're at 31%. So actually, we want to be going the other direction, and we might not have enough headroom the other direction to get it plate dissipation higher. So it's actually running fairly cool right now, which is not a bad thing. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to raise the voltage on the wall, or on the Variac. But first, I'm going to check what the wall voltage is here at my house. So let me grab the multimeter. All right, so it looks like it's showing 120 volts at the wall exactly. So with that in mind, we will go to the Variac and turn it up to 120. You'll notice that this changed as a result. So we're now up to 120 volts. So let's see what that gives us with the bias pot in its current place. So plate dissipation or plate voltage didn't really change, 523 now. But plate current went way up to 30. And now we're at 48.8, not way up, excuse me, way up from when we did the test before. So now we're at basically right at 50% plate dissipation. So that's pretty good. I'm fairly happy with that. What I'm going to do now is turn it off, and then we're going to swap these power tubes to see if that changes at all. So remember 423 and 30. We do get a loud pop when I put it in standby. Not 100% sure why that is, but that's another thing for us to figure out. So we've swapped the tubes now, same socket, but we put the 6L6 that was here over here to see if those numbers were the same. So as a reminder, it was like 423 volts plate voltage, and then 30 for the plate current. So let's see what happens now. It's like 420 and 33. So a bit different. I'm going to write this down so I have it all on record. And that puts us at 53% plate voltage. So we're at 48.8 or around there before. For this tube here and this one here is 53.3. So there's about a 5% differential between the two, which I think is totally fine. But now let's go ahead and move to the other slot and see what that looks like. So we'll keep this tube hooked up to the probe, and then we will swap this one over. Okay, so now we just moved it over. Let's see what we got. So we've got 420, so we're already at, and 33 plate current, which is the same. So that is consistent between both sockets. So now we will swap the tubes over one more time and see if this one is consistent in that tube socket or not. So it just appears that this tube, it seems to follow the tube as far as which one is higher or lower in plate dissipation. So this tube seems to be a bit weaker than this tube, but it's only about a 5% differential between the two. So not a big deal. Reminder, we are at 120 volts. So it actually seems like at modern wall voltages, the bias is happier than, or at least in a better state than everyone. I know you got to be so careful because there's so many differing opinions on this stuff. But for me, and my goal of shooting for about 50% plate dissipation, 50 to 60% modern wall voltage in this amp with the vintage accurate resistor on the bias pot gives me that at 120 volts. So if I were to drop it down to 117, it would be cooler, which is not what I want. So that all looks good. Now I do have some other 6V or 6L6s, excuse me, to try in this. So I'm just curious. I'm going to go ahead and swap one of those over. I'm going to talk about those tubes that I got for this amp later, either in this video or the next video. But for now, I just want to go ahead and swap the tube just to see what that looks like on the bias meter here. So back on standby, and we will swap these tubes out. All right, so we've got the different 6L6s in here. Let's go ahead and see what those bring in. So it looks like we're looking at 419 for the plate voltage and 31. And that's exactly 50%. Awesome. And these tubes are actually different. I forgot to change in the calculator what type of tube it is. These are 6L6 GCs. So we're going to go ahead and redo that first test with the bias pot turned the other way. So they should actually be a bit lower than 50%. Because 6L6 GCs, according to this website, have a higher max wattage. Yeah, so that's 43%. Okay, so I'm now too negative, I think. Well, we'll see. We'll play it. That could be totally fine. I don't know. Like what I like to do when I'm doing bias for amps is to play them, because really that's going to tell you a lot. So either way, let's just make a note of this and then go ahead and swap the tubes over. So let's go ahead and test it now. So we've swapped the two tubes, but kept the probe in the same socket. After we determined with the previous tubes that moving the probe between sockets didn't actually change the values, I think it's okay to test on just one and then move the tubes. I think we'll operate under that assumption for right now. So the first one was 419 volts, plate dissipation, or sorry, plate current at 31. So this is now 34. Which puts this one at 47.5% plate dissipation. So a bit closer to 50. This one was at 43% if we're judging these as 30 watt tubes based off of this tube type. It says 6L6 GC 30 watts. So assuming that's correct, then we went from 43% plate dissipation to 47 So it's only a 4% difference. So again, I don't think it's that much of a difference. Certainly not enough to disqualify these tubes from being usable. So my main takeaway for right now, I guess, is that with the bias maxed out, or the max, I guess, I don't know how you would say it, the most voltage the bias circuit will allow, not most negative voltage, but most voltage, or closest to 0, is maxed out, and that gives me the closest plate dissipation numbers to 50%. And if I go the other direction, it's just much, much cooler. So if I want to be able to bias this hotter, I'm going to have to change the resistor value in the bias circuit. I don't know offhand whether I need to go a higher resistor or a lower resistor. Right now it's got a, let's see what the schematic says. It's got a 27K in it. So I don't know if I need to go down to like a 22K or if I need to go the opposite direction. So let me know in the comments on that one. But for now, I feel pretty good. The last little test I want to do is just to show that there is sound coming out of the amp. I can hear it from the speaker next to me. Obviously, it's making those pop noises. So we know it is on some level, but I'm going to grab a guitar and just do a quick test. Grab my guitar, just a little telly. Let me turn it down a little bit. It's really late, so I don't want to play any more than that, but it works. I'm so excited and happy to hear it work. It sounds really good, it sounds healthy. So now, next steps will be the fun part. I think we'll leave it biased how it is right now. 50% seems to be a good range to start with, and then we can go over the tubes and some other exciting, cool things I picked up, and finally do a demo of this amp and see how it sounds. So fingers crossed it sounds okay. It doesn't sound terrible, because that would be such a bummer. But just based off of hearing it right now, it sounds lovely. It's going to sound lovely. I know it will. So I'm super excited that everything came together. Sweet. All right. I guess I'll see you guys tomorrow, but you'll see me in. So we're going to continue to do some testing while it's still on the workbench. As a reminder, I've got more parts still coming in. After cleaning the power switch, I've done a few more tests off camera, and it started up perfectly fine each time. So I think that's good to go, just needed to be cleaned. But what I wanted to do real quick is just do another test with the Tremolo, and then I also took the reverb tank out of the cab, and I've got the cables here so we can plug that in and see if that works, and then kind of continue moving forward through the amp from there. So we'll go ahead and start it up. Just double check everything. We got power, guitar cable, everything is turned off. Speaker cable out. Let's go and turn it on. Pilot light came on immediately. Just see, like, warm up for a second. We probably need about maybe negative 35 on one end to maybe negative 50-ish on the other end. Have a bit more of a usable range here. But as shown, that results in a very safe amount for the tubes. Getting some hum. Seems like this right socket here, if I move it around, there's some hum with the amp. Now it's gone if I just move the tube. So we'll note that power tube socket needs to be cleaned. Now let's make sure we're getting some signal, passing signal normally. So we'll turn it up. It is, so that's good. We'll check the other input. So go input 2. Input 2 is working fine. That works fine. Go channel 2 input 1, or sorry, channel 1 input 1. Great. So all of that checks out. Let's go back to the vibrato channel. And we will grab one of our RCA shorting plugs for the tremolo. We are getting some ticking. It seems to be less than before. But that appears to be working fine. So now let's go ahead and plug in the reverb tank off to the side. These cables look like they might have had better days, so that's something to note. Now, I've got the reverb on 10. Turn the volume up. No reverb. Pretty sure I've got the right side, the red one into reverb input, black into reverb output. I'm pretty sure that's correct. So no reverb. Now I have tested this reverb tank into another amp and it worked fine. And the reverb also worked in this amp when I first got it. So let's put it back in standby for a second. So I know the tank is fine, but just to be sure, let's check the ohms. So the red side reads about 1.5, which is what I would expect for that to be working. This one should be higher. 178 roughly. My limited knowledge, I think that is correct. And again, I've tested that spring tank with those cables just from putting the cab next to another amp cab just to see, and it worked fine. So with that in mind, we've got to figure out what's wrong on the amp side. All right, so it's now maybe 45 minutes later. I've been trying to troubleshoot this reverb, pulling my hair out, going, what in the world is going on here? So as mentioned, the reverb tank works in another amp. So using the cables, the RCA cables, everything, just taking the entire unit, taking it out of the Vibrolux cab and putting it into a different Fender amp, and it works perfectly fine. So I know that's fine. I measured the actual connections here to the reverb tank. Those measure fine. So I know the tank end is fine. I'm going through everything in the amp, and I cannot find anything that would point to there being an issue with the reverb. Everything looks solid. I tried poking and prodding with this and checking all of the voltages here at the sockets for V3, V4. I tried swapping several tubes in V3 and one tube in V4, and that didn't seem to fix it. So what I've got in it right now is as far as I know, brand new JJ 12AX7 in V4, which the schematic calls for 7025, which is a 12AX7. And then in this slot for V3, I have a 12AT7. Let me pull out what tube is in it right now. So this is actually the one that I believe came with the amp. A 6072, looks like a GE as far as I can tell. So there should be no issues with that tube. And this one is a brand new JJ. So why would that have any issues? I don't know. Well, pulling my hair out, I decided to continue swapping tubes and see, and I had another JJ, again, just for testing, in V5, which also calls for a 12AX7. So I decided to move it over, and then I put in a groove tube that came with the amp in V5 just to keep everything to be known good parts, or at least known working parts. So I'm going to demonstrate for you guys. Turn the amp on here, because this is wild and I didn't know this really could be possible. But let's let it warm up for a second. So we're getting signal. Now, I don't know if you can see the reverb knob here, but that's on 1, that's on 10. So 0 reverb. Getting tone, getting signal, but no reverb. I'm like, what the heck? So now let's go ahead and swap out that JJ, which again, as far as I knew, was a brand new JJ from my stash. Here it is. Looks just like a normal JJ. We're going to swap in a different JJ. Same exact tube. Now let's go ahead and turn it on. We got reverb on 10, just as a reminder. Reverb works. So this tube, I don't understand why. Maybe you guys can educate me, but it passed signal fine, but yeah, it just no reverb with this plugged in for some bizarre reason. So that's going in the trash stash. Although, let's do a test. Let's put it in V1, see what happens, because I'm really curious now. So that works totally fine. Turn that down. So let's turn the amp off, and we'll throw this in V1 and see what happens. So let's see if the amp works, or if that tube is just completely bad. So you guys are gonna have to explain that to me, because that makes absolutely no sense. The tube seems to work fine in V1. The known bad tube that would not pass the reverb signal in V4, but in V1 works completely fine. I have no idea. Well, we at least solved the issue, so now we can confirm that everything in the amp works. Both inputs on each channel seem to work. All of the knobs seem to work. The tremolo works. It does have some ticking. That might be something for a bit later. And then now reverb is working fine. The power is turning on. The pilot light is turning on consistently now every single time since cleaning that out. So that's good to go. So really the only remaining issue that I am currently aware of with the amp is this socket, where if I move it around a little bit, it's got a little bit of noise to it. The other one seems to be maybe a little bit noisy, but the rest of the preamp tube sockets seem to be totally fine. So we'll clean that out. But other than that, I think we can, well, I do have more parts coming in, as I've mentioned. I've got a few resistors to swap that I didn't have the exact value, that I had to pick up some additional ones, and then this will probably drop down to a 22K or a 15K to have more headroom on the bias, but it's not worth delaying this video for a week for those parts to come in. So awesome. Super stoked that that's been fixed, and we've got reverb. So super cool.